Welcome to another episode of the Word Design Podcast. My name is Ini.
Hi guys, my name is Emmanuel. Good to be back again.
Yeah, and today we are going to go deep into metrics that matter while navigating the growth funnel, specifically through the lens of research and strategy. We're joined by Angie Amlani, an executive director of research and strategy at MetaLab. She leads a team of researchers and strategists working with global brands like Amazon, Uber, and Google. Welcome to the podcast, Angie.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So let's get into it. When most people think about growth metrics, they think conversion rates, CAC, LTV, all of these fancy terms. But as a research leader, what metrics do you believe actually matter the most when brands are navigating the early stages of growth?
Yeah, I love this question, Innie. I think what's interesting for me at MetaLab, we get to work with such a wide mix of companies. So startups fresh out of stealth or still in stealth, growth stage teams trying to scale, and massive companies like Nike. I was just telling you we're wrapping up a project with Nike. And across all of that, the thing that I see the most consistently, no matter the size or the funding level, is that teams are so often unclear on the problem they're trying to solve or who they're solving it for. And that probably sounds surprising, but honestly, we've had so many well-founded VC-backed startups and companies who maybe have a product already built or not, who can't give an answer to the question, what problem are you solving and who is it for? So I think coming from both a research and strategy lens, that's where I always start. Because if the problem isn't defined, or even worse, if the problem isn't a real one, which also happens a lot, that's when things really start to fall apart. So you can build something beautifully designed, well engineered, but if it's not solving a real need, it won't land. So I think that's fundamentally the foundation for growth. You have to actually have a real tangible thing that you're solving. Our chief design officer, Sarah Vienna, is kind of known for brutally coming into meetings with founders and asking them, does this product even deserve to exist? And that can be really intense for founders, but at the earliest stage, that matters. Emotional resonance matters. So I'm looking for signs that the problem is real and that it actually clicks with folks.
Gosh, I already have follow-ups. Okay. First of all, talking about not solving real problems, and it sounds like you see it more often than not, and it should not be surprising, but at the end of the day, it also still feels surprising that that's a thing. And I was just reading an article about language market fit, right? And how you talk about what you're there for. And I'm wondering how much of this filters into then how you guide them through it. So say you have a client, for example, who's come to you and they get hit with the sharp realization that maybe the problem they were trying to solve is not as big or deserves to exist, to use that phrase. How do you then help them? How do you walk it back? Is it oh, we're sorry, this product doesn't deserve to exist, so we're not working with you? Or how do you walk away from that?
That's such a good question. No, I very rarely ever said, slam the door in their face. But I think this is where research is super, super helpful, because it's rare that folks are so far off that there's not a spark or an ember of something, but it can be really easy to just go down the wrong pathway really quickly. And I actually think this is where, I can't remember who told me this, but somebody told me, it's really incredibly important to have 100 people who love your product or love your product idea. Doesn't have to be 1,000, doesn't have to be 100,000, but are there 100 people that are obsessed with this idea? And I think that's where, in those cases, we often start doing some qualitative research with folks and to really understand, okay, if this isn't the problem that matters to you, what is? And help clients sort of pivot and rethink and reimagine a value proposition and find ways to talk about it and to shape a product roadmap that are really going to sort of meet the needs of those 100 people. I worked with this really incredible woman who called these people your hot core super fans, which I think is hilarious. But But really, that's it. So, like, if we've identified the people that you think that your solution is going to serve, and you haven't nailed the solution, well, then let's keep talking to those folks and figure out what will. And oftentimes, like, the problem solution fit isn't as far away as you think that it is.
I think I like that. Like you said, keep talking to the user until you understand what really is that problem market fit for your clients. So that brings to the next question, right? How then can we not just have research as an afterthought, right? You talked about how clients come and like, oh, we want to solve for this, and it doesn't fit the market they're trying to solve for, which begs the fact that probably they had not done their homework or done sort of research to understand the problem space very well, right? So how do we then bring forth a case that research should be driving strategy from day one?
I honestly, Emmanuel, I get this question a lot, even from my own sales team, sometimes from my own C-suite. And the honest answer is that research isn't always the most urgent or visible input to every decision. I think it's always important, but there are a lot of factors that shape strategy. But I think what I'll say is that when teams treat research as something you can bolt on after choices or decisions have been made, they're missing like really what it's best at. And a lot of companies, even the ones that have super impactful researchers and research teams, Nike being an example that I just am working with right now, like they see research mainly as a way to de-risk. And research can do that. And we do that type of evaluative research at MetaLab all the time. But the companies that really succeed and use research well, use it for more than just like making sure you don't make mistakes. They use it as a way to solve problems or unlock different opportunity spaces as a creative input, I think, more than just validation. And for companies, that are focused on growth, which is essentially what this podcast is about, it matters that you're solving problems in fresh and unexpected ways. And that is always what I communicate, whether it's in an advisory capacity or in the sales process. The market's moving fast, consumer behavior is shifting fast. And if you're only reacting to what's happening and you're not anticipating what's next, then you're probably missing a bunch of really great opportunities. And research can be a really big game changer. So I always make sure to say that in the sales process and make that case. And I will be honest that I don't always win that battle, but I think it's really important conversation and sort of the differentiation conversation that we're always having in the space.
So when we look at the team that you lead, there are user researchers, you've got market researchers, there are product strategists. Help us understand how that works together, because for whomever may be listening to this episode, like me, like I understand what these roles do in isolation, but together under your unit, and especially at an agency setup like MetaLab, how does that provide value to the clients? How does this help with like understanding and optimizing the growth that you've described for brands?
Well, it's really interesting. And I mean, there's a reason why I lead a research and strategy team, like why they're paired together. Because I think the best researchers in E are ones that think strategically, and the best strategists, product strategists, are the one that apply rigor to their thinking. And so, if we rarely are on projects where we have both a strategist and a researcher, they're sort of used in different contexts in different ways. But on a project, let's say with like an early stage founder, they're coming to us with a problem. They want to understand whether or not their product is really going to solve a need or whether what they built or developed is going to win in the market. Oftentimes, a researcher will work with them, get really clear on who their product is for, and then do concept testing. Concept testing is like one of the types of research we do the most at MetaLab. And that is quite literally just like getting on a Zoom call with a bunch of people and bringing like a very strategic and empathetic skill set and mindset and having conversations with them
about the value of the product. And this is super, super important. And this is something that AI doesn't do very well. And we can talk about that later. But the folks on my team, researchers, they show up and they just have really well thought out conversations with folks about the solutions that are putting in front of them. And these conversations last from like 45 to 60 minutes. And that's sort of like one type of very primary research that we do. Strategists are often taking the outputs of that type of work and shaping it into sort of a really resonant product strategy.
Looking at the roles you guys talked about and the concepts testing workshop. Let's just be like a workshop that you do, right? Now, how do you translate raw user insight into action that brand can act on, right? After you've had the research, brainstorming sections, most of the time, some of these things are packed into documents, files that don't get hacked on. So how do you then, balance between discovery research and the need for quick actions in like a fast-paced context?
Totally. I think the best insights and the ones that are the most impactful are the ones that are really clear and easy to action on. So I think like all really good researchers will hone in on the most important things for a brand to pay attention to and make that really like the cornerstone of their analysis. And there are a lot of things that are really important to making sure that you can have an insight that's really going to be impactful for brands. And the first is making sure that you really understand their business and that you understand the problem that they're trying to solve. And that is foundational. And I think like one aspect of that that's super important in terms of like moving in fast environments is that the insight feels tangible, that it's not like philosophical or esoteric, that it really comes down to solving like a fundamental like user need. And so talking in that language and communicating in that way is super, super important. And I think qualitative research is so important for that. And qualitative research doesn't have to be like big. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be quick. It can be dirty. And you don't have to have like a perfectly written strategy document coming out of it, but you can find that little nugget in an interview and then decide to strategically act on that because you already have the context of knowing the business and knowing the user and knowing where they're trying to go. And so I think that's really important, like being able to hold all of those different things in your mind and then communicate the why of an insight being important to you, whether it's a strategy or a roadmap or a growth metric. So thinking about the problem, not in isolation, but thinking holistically through the environment and the context and the problem that you're trying to solve is really key to getting insights that are both impactful and that can be acted on right away.
As a researcher for X number of years, like based on your experience, is there a way for you to sort of see an insight or uncover an insight and this insight would be impactful? Is there a way, like, will you say is the intuition based, data driven? Like, does it have to be intuition based or does it have to be backed by data before you can sort of make like a prediction like this insight, I can hit my chest that, oh, this is a very good insight if you apply it, are there like signals that you look out for as a researcher?
Yeah, there are. And actually, I have a really interesting story that I think kind of relates to this, which about sort of balancing that need around intuition around gaps, feeling like there's like a piece of the puzzle that's unsolved that you actually want to do research on to thus enable. So we worked with a company called Tally Health. So have you heard of Tally by any chance? You have? Okay. So they're a longevity focused health company. They offer biological age testing based on epigenetic markers, and then they help sort of people think through ways to reverse the aspects of biological aging. So when we first engaged with them, they came with this huge market research report. So they had engaged like a big company. They had done this huge survey, a lot of dense quant heavy data. And they were like, we've figured out our target audience. They're biohackers, they're health optimizers, and we're ready to build this product and get moving. And my researcher on the product was like, hold on, something is missing. They really felt that there was like a foundational layer that they did not understand about these people. And so they said, hey, I have no doubt that these biohackers and health optimizers have interest in your product, but I don't understand why. I don't understand why they would have interest in your product yet. So we advocated to take a step back, do some quick foundational qualitative research, and explore not just who they were from a quantitative sense, but who they were from a qualitative sense and how they felt in the actual moments that would matter in the product. And this was just instinct based on, this researcher's experience. They're like, we haven't articulated the why strongly enough. So one key insight that emerged when we did those interviews was that for most people, when they learned that their biological age was younger than their actual age, it was like super reaffirming and like it gave them this really intense attachment to the product. But for the folks who found out that their behavioral, like their biological age was was older than how old they actually were. It was like really scary, and it triggered fear and shame. And just from like 10 interviews, we fundamentally changed like parts of the product roadmap, and we developed behavioral models that showed how to support people emotionally, even when they received difficult news. And it sort of materialized into this idea of personalized action plans. And those action plans are what people come back to for the product today. And so I think, like, as a researcher, you have an instinct when you work in the space that, you know, you may understand aspects of an audience, you may understand where they live, what their purchasing habits are, whatever, how old they are. But if you don't understand fundamentally why the product might resonate, that's a really good like moment or trigger to think about the need to step back and dig a little bit deeper, because that can really unlock parts of your brand experience or your product. And I think that's really, really important.
I mean, I'd be pissed. Someone or some product told me I was 50 years old.
Totally.
Seriously.
Totally.
Yeah, so I can understand how that is such a strong emotional. Someone's like, wait, what? That's a what?
Yeah. Yeah, like you get on the product and it's like, you are not 40 years old. You are actually in the body of a 65-year-old. How does that feel? Does that feel good? It feels good. So that's like, but that's like such a good example of like, there are humans underneath all of this, right? And you need to talk to and understand the humans that are going to use your product.
Yeah. And honestly, that is the perfect angle for this next one. So let's talk about humans versus AI research, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is so there. I see so much news about like we've got AI personas popping up. I actually still got one in my email this morning. This company asking, "Oh, we've seen your LinkedIn about how you talk about growth design. Would like you to test out AI personas for research." And I have a sneaky feeling I'm not the only one who is like very distrusting of this AI research business. Like I don't see how you want to substitute talking to real humans, no matter how much you want to clone everything. But I get ahead of myself. Let's talk about if there's any process, because there's a lot of movement around incorporating AI in some way into the work that you do. Right. So for you at MetaLab, how are you integrating generative AI into your research workflows? And are there parts of your workflows that you've found has been enhanced, not just sped up through it? And then the sub question to that is, if yes and yes, and when you've explained the answer, how do you then research and validate new market categories, especially in today's world where it's absolutely bonkers and traditional metrics and things like that don't necessarily apply anymore?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Annie. I mean, like we're talking about this constantly at MetaLab, and especially on my team. And we're using tons of AI native tools to support and speed up our research process. And I think it's really important to be leaning into the aspects of AI native tools that can improve research operations and research efficiency. And we are using. Just don't use ChatGPT to pull quotes, because I've seen some pretty wild outputs and it does not work. But in all seriousness, it's super useful. So the ways that we're using it, if we just start there, we're using it a lot as a research thought partner. So when we write a research plan or we write a survey, we throw it into a tool like ChatGPT and ask like, am I asking double-barreled questions? Do my questions, are they latent with assumptions and bias? Are there ways that I could rewrite this moderator guide or this survey for clarity? It's a really incredible thought partner. It's like having a graduate student, in your pocket to really help the clarity of your outputs. We're also using it to do what I would call sort of like high-level synthesis. So we'll take a bunch of different inputs, we'll ask it very specific questions and use ChatGPT to help us find specific patterns. We've demoed a ton of tools. I think our favorite right now, if they're watching, is one called Wondering. So really amazing tool. Highly recommend checking it out. And there are so many tools that are bespoke to all parts of the research process. But I think what's really interesting to me, Annie, is that the quality that made somebody a good researcher before AI are the things that like AI still can't replicate. So the ability to ask the right question at the right time, to follow a thread of curiosity on the discussion guide, to notice when someone says one thing but clearly feels another. Like those areas of discernment are where real insight lives. And as a researcher, I'm not just interested in what people are doing. I care about why they do it and how they're doing it. And AI isn't built to explore the why in the same way that humans are. And I think like you mentioned synthetic data and synthetic persona. So like, I think they can be helpful. There's absolutely a role for them in research. And that data, it's scraped from broad public behavior, mass market platforms, sanitized UX feedback, and all of that stuff. But you get this really averaged out version of a user, and it blurs the edges, it flattens nuance, it overlooks marginalized communities. And like, if you're testing out a real Gen Pop idea, synthetic personas can be super helpful. But there are so many emergent and greenfield spaces where AI is not useful. And I actually, a client that we worked with recently, they're called Crusoe AI. They actually just got $500 million to build OpenAI's Starship data center. So they're really like emerging company in the space. And they came to us and they said, hey, we have this AI cloud computing infrastructure that we are trying to sell to VPs of enterprises who are running machine learning teams and who are running AI innovation teams. We don't understand them. And there's no synthetic data set that can be used to understand those folks and their needs. Like they just doesn't exist. And so I think more than anything, that is the use case anywhere researchers are going to be focused the most on these greenfield emergent spaces, emergent verticals. That is where the traditional researcher is going to be focusing. And as those like spaces are emerging, yes, there will probably be more synthetic data sets, for example, that are trained on that data that thus you can learn from. But research should be on the forefront of innovation in those spaces. And that's really where I believe our team will be deployed the most in the future.
I mean, 100%. I don't really think that aspect of human can, at least for now, can be taken away, and you really hit the nail on the head. So let's talk about the future. Sort of, how do you see teams balancing the use of AI and human insights? Like, you use AI to do research and also the human aspect of the research. And how do you see it being used in a way that makes such research or approach being useful?
I really encourage my team to think about AI native tools as a way to operationalize research and to be a thought partner in research, and not a way to outsource creative thinking. And I think a lot of people consider researchers to be like kind of rigid thinkers, but actually the best researchers I know are super, super creative. And I think that'll be so important in the future. Every researcher in a year from now will have an AI tool that can do recruiting, that can write moderator guides, that can do synthesis, that can do all of those things, that are going to be able to tell you, where there is statistical significance in your data set, whatever. But that discernment, the decision to decide like what to pay attention to, why it's important, why it matters, that is something that AI is not good at. In the same way that there's all this conversation around taste and AI generated outputs, there's discernment is so important for researchers. And I would encourage folks to lean into the ways in which AI tools can make you faster. Don't shy away from those things because you will fall behind, but double down on the things that really bring joy in researchers, which is figuring out how to solve problems and like focusing your energy there. That is what I think is going to be the future of research and the future of like insights-driven strategy.
Okay. You've said something that I want to bring to from the perspective of designers who are now listening to this episode, right? We, by default, a lot of us humans seek novel experiences. And if you are very lucky to be neurodiverse, you are ultra seeking it, except for myself. But yet, a lot of the growth type of research that we have oftentimes focuses on optimizing existing behaviors. And I know this from just like being a growth product designer. You're looking at the existing part that have been designed as a core part of a product, and you're thinking, all right, what are the opportunities that exist within this where we're not using it up to the max, right? Whereas sometimes, actually, I feel like in today's world, especially, and at the rate at which AI is growing and our worlds are changing, we need more of that novelty kind of research approach. Like you said, discernment and taste. But beyond just that as a concept, now, can we drill in a bit further? How do you research for novelty and anticipate what users will actually want? How can designers like me, like Manuel, put that research lens on when we are not by default researchers, so to speak, in practice?
Annie, that's such a good question. When we're trying to explore and understand new and novel experiences, there is so much that's important to understand about emotional resonance, for example. Like, what makes people tick? What is something that's going to, like, what's in the cultural zeitgeist? What is an opportunity to dig deeper and learn more about a cultural trend? And I think that fundamentally comes from having conversations with people. And I really believe that. Like, I really believe in the power of qualitative research to help unlock new and novel ways of thinking. Because novelty comes from nuance, you know? And you don't get nuance in a big data set. You don't get nuance from optimization. And so I think for folks who maybe don't have a research background, I would say that doesn't matter. You know, you are a human, follow a trend of curiosity, show up in a user interview and ask questions that you're generally wondering about, and go deeper, like dive several layers deeper than you would initially expect, and sort of let a conversation flow naturally. Those are the moments that I think really interesting opportunities and interesting insights come from. So I would start there. And then I also think imagining opportunities for different types of people, thinking through the lens of inclusivity, making sure you're exploring outliers and diverse perspectives, and you're bringing those folks into your conversations and your data set. That is also super important. Not making assumptions about people and who a product's for and what an experience is for and what's going to make those people tick. So I think, like, honestly, just starting from a place of curiosity is so, so important. And anybody can do that. You do not have to be a trained researcher to do that.
So important with all the AI products being built. Oh, so good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because AI doesn't have curiosity.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this next question is something I would say has really been bothering me particularly, right? You know, there's a lot of tool right now you could literally just jump on and vibe code and you have a product. And you say, okay, get it to the end of the users and you keep iterating, rapid iteration, move fast, you don't have to waste time, blah, blah, blah. So how do we balance the concept of you got an idea, you vibe code, then you can improve on it. And then the other aspect of the traditional research approach, trying to understand the problem space and then approaching it the right way before vibe coding. Because there's a notion that, oh, you waste time, blah, blah, blah. Just get started. So how do we then balance this vibe coding culture, which is in vogue right now, and the traditional way of just understanding the market space? What is the problem? Talk to your customer before you then create MVP or blah blah, or whatever approach you want to take to build a product. What's the balance? And if you are going with the vibe coding thing, at what point do you think there will be a limiting growth to that idea?
That's a really interesting question. I think, like, the biggest misconception, Manuel, about research is that it has to be expensive or formal or deeply quantitative. And, like, vibe coding, it's about iteration, it's about moving fast, it's about being able to do your things, bootstrap, go quickly, do things yourself, be outside of the establishment and the bureaucracy of product design and development and research. There are a lot of ways to incorporate research into this type of, like, cultural movement. I think, honestly, in early stage, most of that over-engineered bureaucratic research, like A/B testing, click testing, surveying, a lot of it can be just noise. So I guess like the question really isn't how much research you're doing, but are you doing the right kind? So no matter how quickly you're moving or whether you're doing things yourself, there are like 3 core questions that I think you need to answer from a researcher standpoint. And again, you don't have to be a trained researcher to do this, but like, who are your users really? Is there a real market, not just interest, but people willing to pay? And are you solving a problem that actually exists outside of your own head? And I think if you can answer all 3 of those questions, that's where clarity lives. And, there's like a real minimum viable research approach there. I think the second part of your question was like, when is there diminishing returns around? Was that it?
I think, we could also flip it, or is there a diminishing return? Because, I mean, there is the example of this guy who sold base 40 for 2 weeks for plus £1 million or whatever the cost is. And yeah, I think when we wrote this question, it was also like, is there, maybe it's challenging all we know about research as well, right? Like, is there diminishing returns?
And I think she has actually answered it because you actually talked about the fact that there is something, and I think I wrote it down. That's like a new word for me, MVR, minimum viable research. So you don't necessarily have to. That was the first thing you said. Like, we think research should be this expensive approach where you have blah blah blah. It's basically not that. You could actually be vibe coding and equally, right, be asking questions and be doing that. Even because when you even have those basic questions answered, you are able to unlock some part of those vibe coding thing that you could craft a better solution. So probably the other part of limiting the growth is already diminished, like it's taken out, because the myth of research being this bogus big research where you have, so it's just like there's an untraditional way of actually doing research.
It's true. That's a really good reframe. And I think the other thing is like, research shouldn't be this thing that just happens in isolation, right? Like, it should be this thing that is evolving over time. You should always have questions that you want to ask to your users. But I think the thing is like, there's a way to democratize that. Like, it doesn't have to be expensive. And in my view, like, high quality, low volume conversations are super, super important. And you can do that on your own, like going deep instead of wide, finding 5 to 10 people that might resemble your early adopters and just having real open-ended conversations with them, not surveys, not feature pitching, just conversations and just asking them questions. And you should always be evolving your product, no matter if you are building it and using AI tools to help you code it, or somebody is building it for you. There should always be questions that you're answering. And that's super, super important. It doesn't have to slow you down. And I think that's really important. A lot of people think about research as this like huge bureaucratic thing where you have to set aside 3 to 6 weeks and answer all of these really rigid questions, but that's not true. You can still get a ton of value from quick iterative conversations that enable you in your decision making. And that's really, really important. And that can be incredibly valuable. And I would encourage people to make sure that they're doing that. It's not about scale. It's more about relevance, I'd say.
I love that. It's not about skill, it's more about relevance. Yeah. Because I think in my experience, I am vibe coding a tool right now, to be fair. And it's more of I think what I've found for women is there is oftentimes such a long gap from when you begin to identify symptoms to when you actually get a diagnosis, especially when it's concerning reproductive health. And that came from experience, right? Exactly, right? And the amount of pain, because there is no visual data around the pain you're experiencing, is really hard for your doctors to truly be able to understand how best to help you and personalize your care. Anyway, long and short is I started to vibe code the tool around this, and I just put it in my Twitter bio as my current side quest is I am creating a pain tracker to help visualize what living with pain looks like. And someone reached out to me, and from there, I've had conversations with at least 3 people already, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is good. Taking that into the tool and continue to build. So yeah, absolutely. I love how this has turned around, and yeah, you can absolutely. I think it's more the consciousness that you have to keep going with these conversations to help continuous iterative improvements in the tool that you're vibe coding, as opposed to, hey, here it is.
I love the way she really kind of for the question because it really brought clarity to that aspect of, not looking at research as expensive or something at scale. I love that word. Relevance, not just scale. Not scale, it's more about.
Any, I will just say, as somebody who suffers from endometriosis,
Me.
it's insane, right? It's like 7 to 15 years upon diagnosis. But I think that's what's so interesting. And maybe there's like a double-edged sword here, which is that I really believe that you need to love your idea. You need to love your product. You need to love where you're going. And that's super, super important. And if you are like building a tool or vibe coding a new pain tracker like you are, then you are your audience to some degree, right? And you can bring that excitement and curiosity that you have to solving a problem for yourself to other people. And I think like that's super, super, super important and something that anybody can do. Like there's so much ingenuity when there's energy around something. When you have that energy, go out and understand how other people perceive it and the energy they have around it and use that to help you fill out your edge cases and your way of understanding the problem. And that's so, so valuable.
Let's talk about the practice of like what this looks like within teams now for you or at MetaLab. What does that cycle look like from when the ball gets ping-ponged back and forth between research, strategy, product design teams, and marketing, whatever the case is? What does that look like internally?
I love that question. Well, I think like we believe in embedded teams. So you said it, research shouldn't be in isolation. And I believe that. I think that you can move fastest when you are bringing folks along with you. I hate the type of research where a researcher just goes by themselves for 3 to 6 weeks, does a bunch of interviews, does a survey, and then says, here's my research report. Good luck. Go build something great. The best research and the research that we do at MetaLab, like designers are there in the conversations that we're having with folks. They're hearing firsthand the experiences that other people are having. And research is feels like a creative sort of springboard for them. So that's one thing. At MetaLab, design and research are really, really closely paired, and they're like BFFs in the product design process. And honestly, I've had some of my best insights generated from designers who sat on research sessions that I was leading, because having somebody else hear that point of view and that perspective and then being able to talk about it is a creative and strategic act all at once. So that's something that's really, really important. Don't do it alone if you don't have to. And we would say we start in the sort of problem solution space a lot of time. And then once we get there, research starts to be really iterative. And that's where we start to incorporate a lot more sort of unmoderated AI generated tools. So we've validated these core emotional propositions and these core value propositions. And then when we're optimizing, that's a really, really, really good opportunity to use tools, because your questions can be super specific. You don't need all of the emotional nuance all of the time to really get to better solutions. So we do concept testing on tools like Wondering or on Listna or on Maze, starting to use what's out there to make decisions really, really quickly. And you don't need a human in the loop for that all of the time. But research is iterative. And I think by doing it that way, it lowers the stakes and makes, as you say, Emmanuel, make sure that you're focused on relevance and continued iteration throughout sort of the product design and development process.
Amazing. Okay, so this next question, right, it's going to be a very tricky one. So we had the fact this were okay, how do you measure the impact of design, or what is the ROI of design, right? And when it comes to research, one of the things that I think research does is giving clarity, gives you this clarity about what problem you're solving. Now, is there a way to measure the ROI or impact of research even when the solution is being built, once the design is shipped? Or are there feedback loops that could be set up to really track some of those things?
I think, it's a great question. And when I think the industry is really starting to ask in the right way, because when we talk about research feedback loops, we're really talking about building a system of learning, right? And it's not just do a study, get an answer. It's, are we building muscle around sensing, around interpreting, acting and learning over and over again? So the ROI isn't a single metric, right? It's layered. And I think at the most basic level, we can measure things like speed and waste reduction, like how many design sprints or dev cycles did we avoid by catching something early on? Did we stop a feature before it came a 6-month rabbit hole? And that I've seen happen a lot. And then I think you can look at product performance. So if we're running tight loops, meaning we're testing hypotheses, learning fast and adjusting, then we'll start to see that in things like retention and conversion and satisfaction. Maybe not instantly, but consistently. So to me, sort of the underrated piece around research ROI is sort of like organizational confidence, I guess, is maybe how I would boil that down. When you have strong feedback loops, decisions don't feel like they're bets in the dark. It feels like teams stop spinning and in opinion battles, roadmaps get clearer. And when people say no with confidence, I think you know that you're getting the right user signals. So yeah, I think there is a way. And in short, maybe the ROI of research feedbacks of good research is better decisions made faster with less drama, maybe. And if that's worth measuring, if that's not worth measuring, I don't know what is. So that would be my pitch for research ROI. Yeah.
I like that, Cynthia. Like, in terms of the amount of time that will be saved, that's a lot of money if you have to quantify that, to be fair, right? Like, I don't even want to go into that, but that's I love it. I love it.
Yeah, my favorite part is with less drama. That's the fact. Yeah. If we can all make more decisions with less drama, my goodness. All right. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. We absolutely appreciate your time. This has been a fantastic conversation. And we just have 2 questions to ask you as we wrap this up. The first one being, what's one thing that you're learning or exploring right now outside of research? And what books do you recommend to anyone who's building their research skills?
I love that. What am I doing right now outside of, I am playing, actually, I think maybe the best answer to that is I'm learning to build things with my hands. Ooh. So that's probably a really good thing. I am trying to build a table right now. And so I am doing some like basic woodworking courses and trying to figure out how to connect what's going on in my brain with what's going on in my hands and connecting that together. So that's been really, really good. And it's been really helpful to just like do something that doesn't involve looking at a computer. Let me get the best book quickly for you, Emmy. Here I come back. Here I am. Okay. So probably this is an old book, but this goes with my hypothesis that qualitative research is really, really important in the future. And I think more so than quantitative research or like, I don't know, folks who have degrees in computer science. I really strongly believe qualitative research will be important. So this is a really great book. Think Like a UX Researcher, How to Observe Users, Influence Design, and Shape Business Strategy by Travis and Hodgson. It's really, really great, super accessible, and a great way to think about how to ask the right questions in the right way for sort of a minimum viable research approach. So really great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Angie. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Annie. I hope it wasn't too much chaos. No. This was like my first podcast I've ever done. I hope there's something useful for you in there.
Oh my God, no. It was fantastic. Thank you for doing us the honor.
Thank you for having me.
Till next time, everyone. See you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.